My name's Clare Sheffield. I work for Transport for London, which is the integrated transport authority for the Greater London area, overseen by the Mayor. Transport for London is rather older than Transport for the West Midlands, in that we were launched in the year 2000. So we're probably in our teenage years now. We're a maturing transport authority. We are, however, at an earlier stage of development of our current transport strategy. So the transport strategy sets out the priorities and proposals for transport in London. Fundamentally, it governs not just Transport for London, but also all of the 33 London boroughs and the other authorities that look after transport in London, so including Network Rail and the Highways Agency. It really is about the Mayor setting out his goals for the city, making some decisions, laying out his funding priorities. It's essentially a bidding document to make the case for funding for London in the future, and it provides the context for the projects and proposals that we will bring forward in future years. This is our third mayor in London, as I'm sure you all know, and each mayor of London has produced a transport strategy presenting their priorities. So the reddish strategy there is Ken Livingstone's strategy, produced in the early 2000s, and the bluish one, appropriately, is Boris Johnson's strategy, published in 2010. The current mayor, Sadiq Khan, laid out his sort of overarching vision for what he wants from his mayoralty in the City for All Londoners document that was published in the autumn. And that will form the basis of a wide series of strategies, including the transport strategy, which is one of the most substantial of the strategies, but also crucially the London Plan, which sets out the land use planning and development policy for London, and which transport is also absolutely integral to. So what I'm going to talk to you about is basically the work that we've done to identify the challenges that need to be met in that strategy. We don't have a published strategy yet. It will be published in draft this spring. So this is the kind of lead-in, really. So how demand for travel has changed over time. We've got quite a unique position in London in that we have already achieved very substantial mode shift from the car over the past decade or so. So since TfL was formed in 2000, the mode share has fallen by 11 percentage points, which is sort of unprecedented over time and unique in the UK, although we are now starting to see traffic fall elsewhere, and more worryingly from our point of view, we're starting to see traffic rise again in London, showing that you can never rest on your laurels when it comes to mode shift. But we're very proud of our achievements. London has become one of the most sustainable world cities in terms of our mode share. We are the orange bar at the bottom. Every single person that I have showed this to has asked what Chicago are doing right, which was not the message that I had hoped this graph would get across. But look at all the other ones. But we're not sure what they're getting right. But anyway, we're getting a lot right. So I'm not going to talk through this in detail, but this is the result of some quite detailed work we've done over the past few years, and which we're still doing, and which we have published on the TfL website, so you can get hold of, which is called the Drivers of Demand Project, which was to understand basically why we've achieved that mode shift. We hoped that it was the things that we'd done. So all of those things in dark green are basically the things that we did, and that is a combination of masses and masses of investment and improvement in the public transport network, particularly also the cycling network, and also work to deter the car, so the introduction of the congestion charging zone in 2003, and essentially the gradual reallocation of road space away from the car and towards other more sustainable modes. So we did that, it worked, and fares, and of course the fact that it remained financially competitive to use public transport services. We did that, we know it worked, we can keep doing it. But also what we found is that a lot of other factors worked in our favour, and some of those may change. So for those of you who were in the previous discussion about automated vehicles, people were starting to touch on these issues. So for example, the national decline in licence holding amongst young people has been quite profound in London and has led to a significant reduction in car use amongst young people. If licence holding stopped being a barrier to driving, then clearly we might start to see a reversal of those trends. We also had a lot of our population growth in inner London, where you don't get as much car travel. We're expecting much more growth in outer London. Again, that works against us. And also we found that although we were seeing economic growth overall, we weren't seeing growth in incomes in outer London. So where people were going to drive, actually incomes weren't going up, which was holding down car travel. So we know that there were a lot of things that we did, but there were a lot of other things that helped us out. So what do we need to do in future? The biggest challenge facing London is the enormous amount of growth that we're expecting to see. London is the biggest that it's ever been, and it's still growing rapidly. We expect 10.5 million people by 2041. What we're expecting to see is a lot of babies, but also a lot of older people, an ageing population in London. And that's quite challenging because that presents quite different travel challenges and travel patterns than we've seen over the last decade, where growth was really driven by young workers, basically. We're also expecting a huge increase in jobs. This is obviously a good thing, and a real concentration of jobs in what we call the CAZ, the Central Activity Zone, which, for those of you not as familiar with London, is essentially, or with London jargon, is essentially Zone 1 or the congestion charging zone. Also, the Isle of Dogs, you can see, is the absolutely enormous spike there, and we're expecting to also see growth in Stratford because of the huge amount of investment in transport there and the amount of land made available sort of resulting from the Olympics, and at Old Oak Common with the development that will be unlocked by the HS2 going there. Fundamentally, we would make the case that London's economy is absolutely at the heart of UK economic growth. It accounts for a really disproportionate amount of output, but also has grown faster and harder than every other bit of the UK. And we would argue that that is because of the unique level of accessibility to a workforce, to a supply chain, and to a customer base that central London can offer, and that needs to be sustained and protected over the next couple of decades for the British economy. So what does that do? Obviously what it does is it leads to a massive amount more travel, about a quarter more travel, 6 million more trips per day by 2041. To put that in context, that's about as many trips as are made on London's bus network every day at the moment, all over again. So these are our mode share forecasts based on the current level of investment. So this is not the level of ambition that the Mayor will be looking to. The Mayor will be looking to go beyond this, but we're already expecting to see a good level of additional mode shift away from the car. But it's not going to be good enough. We're going to need more. The obvious outcome of that growth, and of course for all of us who live in London, we already know this is a problem, is a massive housing shortage. We need to build 50,000 new homes every year for 25 years. That's a home every 11 minutes needs to be built. At the moment, we're building around half that, so that's every 22 minutes we're one house behind. We're also not building the right sort of houses to meet the demand, and as you can see, in the recent past we have never built anything. We don't even have 50,000 on this graph. I noticed I was going to draw a line to show like where we're heading, and we don't even have it on there. In fact, the only time that level of housing has ever been delivered in London was in the 1930s with the massive expansion into the green belt, which is not something that is going to be considered now. If we don't keep up with demand, housing costs will rise, the standard of living will fall, and that growth will be constrained, but not constrained so much that we won't get massive overcrowding in our housing. So it's basically a huge challenge for London, and we feel that transport is absolutely at the heart of delivering this. We know that transport unlocks housing development. Far more development happens in well-connected areas. A lot of the areas where development could happen in London are really constrained by transport accessibility and need that investment to make them happen. So the schemes like Crossrail 1 or the Elizabeth line will unlock a huge amount of growth, but schemes, it's not going to be enough. We're going to need more. Schemes like Crossrail 2, we need them to unlock that housing growth. So what will the growth do to the network if we don't do more? Well, not surprisingly, it will make it incredibly crowded. These maps are really small, but basically if it's red, black or purple, you don't really want to be experiencing it. It's very, very crowded, and you can see that the London Underground network is hugely crowded by 2041 without further investment, and also particularly that southwest corridor on National Rail, which is exactly the corridor that the Crossrail 2 is targeted at. Huge increases in crowding, 60% on LU, 150% on National Rail. And that's because it gets better over the next decade as all of the tube upgrades go in, but then the growth just starts to outpace it and it gets worse again. And we know that we have to keep delivering for our customers, otherwise they're not going to trust us to invest in the future. So it's a sort of, you risk getting into a vicious cycle. You need to keep a good service so that you can invest more. And of course, as was mentioned earlier in the introduction about the ICE, we're also aware that keeping reliable services will get more difficult as the climate, we start to experience more extreme weather conditions. So you're running just to catch up, really. Congestion will also rise. A fairly horrific stat that we, again, if we don't do anything, which we will, we expect 2.5 days congestion per person per year by 2041. That's just not a reliable network. And most of that congestion is caused simply by there being too much demand for the roads. We can use the sort of intelligent systems that we've got to deal with incidents and sort of works and things like that. But at the end of the day, if you've got too much traffic, the only thing that you can do is reduce the amount of traffic on the roads. And that's going to lead to really traffic-clogged streets. Our streets are already not meeting people's expectations. You can't really see the detail of that graph, but those are essentially all of the sort of factors that people have told us make them feel like a street is a pleasant place to be. And you can see that against every factor, our streets are not performing. The green line is lower than the blue line, and the blue line is what they want, and the green line is what they're getting. So those are pretty transporty, classic transport concerns. But we're also thinking much more broadly. This mayoral team are very interested in the wider impacts of transport on quality of life, on our health and well-being. A particular emerging concern, which I think certainly isn't something that I was aware of being talked about sort of 5 years ago, or when we did the sort of the last transport strategy, is the realisation of the incredible importance of physical activity and the role that transport can play in that. And this will be sort of, we think, the first transport strategy that really takes ownership of that public health responsibility. Only 34% of Londoners do enough activity to be healthy at the moment. And we know that it's very difficult to build activity into your day, but you only have to do a little bit of activity in your travel to achieve it. And crucially, it's not just about walking and cycling all the way, because you can see that there is a massive difference between the amount of activity you get from public transport journeys, so these ones, from if you're in your car, where it's just a completely sedentary experience. This actually underestimates the activity benefit of public transport, because also you're more likely to be moving around whilst you're using the system. That's a huge imperative to move people out of their cars and onto more sustainable modes. Another enormous challenge facing London is poor air quality. Obviously, this has been all over the press, and it is the top priority of the Mayor. We're currently in breach of legal limits on NO2, which means that our air is not healthy. 50% of NOx and particulate emissions come from road transport in London. There is no safe level for the finer particulates. And it's likely that we'll see even lower legal limits on both particulates and NO2 in future. So there's so much that we need to do. You can see from this map. So this is the forecast means without the current set of proposals that are being consulted on, I should say. So there is a consultation happening of a wide-ranging set of proposals to tackle this problem. And this is what will happen if we don't do it. Finally, carbon. We've had this target in orange for a very long time, the target to reduce carbon. We've not made an enormous amount of progress towards meeting it. As you can see, we're still a long way off. And the Mayor has set a much more ambitious target that by 2050, London will be a zero carbon city. to deliver that, we need to think completely differently. A lot of it's about vehicle technology and about, much cleaner vehicles, but we won't be able to deliver all of it through that, and we will need to just change the way that we live and travel as well. So we need to reduce the amount of car travel. It's a fundamental. All of these things all lead towards the same conclusion, that we need to change the way that we're travelling so that our roads actually function, so that we have nice streets to be on, so that we have clean air, so that we have, we're not emitting dangerous levels of carbon, and so that we're active enough for our own health. We don't have enough space to accommodate all of these people in cars. And that's true whether they're cars that are driven or cars that drive themselves. We don't have enough space. This diagram is just for central London, but it shows the incredible space inefficiency of cars, taxis, and minicabs compared to buses and bikes. Essentially, the top line shows the amount of road space that they're using, and the bottom line shows the person kilometres that are being carried on that mode. And I think it speaks for itself. The red one is bus. So bus, thumbs up. Cars, not very good. And we think the potential is there to deliver this mode shift. We accept that, some journeys are essential by car. At the moment, with current conditions, we reckon that about a third of car journeys in London don't have any reasonable mode available. And we know that more journeys than that, that's based on stuff we know about those journeys. And there's other things that we don't know about those journeys that would mean that more journeys than that couldn't be made by car. And sometimes you need journeys to be made by a car. If that's someone's only way of being in work, then the economic benefit of that is going to outweigh the benefit of shifting. But lots and lots of journeys have an alternative available and could be shifted with relatively no or little damage or even benefit to the people concerned. This is our analysis of the kind of modes that they've got available. We've done lots more work looking at sort of segmenting the population, understanding the nature of these trips, understanding what could get them to shift. But fundamentally, we think mode shift is necessary and it's possible. So the new transport strategy will be developed to meet these challenges. It's going to take a sort of a sub-regional approach, looking at central London, inner London, outer London, and then our relationship with the area beyond. We're not always very good at remembering that there is an area beyond London, but I believe it does exist, and very important links. And we'll have 3 core priorities, which will be to deliver a good public transport experience, to deliver healthy streets for healthy people, and to support the economy, new homes and jobs. So, in conclusion, we are one of the most sustainable world cities in terms of transport mode share, and the scale of growth is a sign of success, but there is a huge risk that without further action, our network will become overcrowded and congested, creating a poor quality of life in London. And we need to tackle these wider challenges. That means that people need to be able to travel differently in future, and the transport strategy will contain a whole range of policies and proposals covering not just the way that we travel, but also the way that we build our housing and development to tackle this.